It's my privilege to introduce my friend Pat Fogarty, our featured author tonight. Pat is an editor, award-winning author, and poet. Born and raised in the South Bronx, his works are infused with personal experiences, historic research, and a vivid imagination. He writes creative nonfiction, literary fiction, and poetry. He's also the founder and CEO of Granite Publishing and is the editor and publisher of the AZ Writers series of best short stories and poems. He will be reading from best short stories? Maybe?
Yeah, I got a couple of short stories.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So my name is Pat. Happy to be here. I grew up in the South Bronx, maybe half a mile from Yankee Stadium in the 1950s and 60s. And it was a bad area. I did not realize how bad the area really was until I left. And it was pretty bad. The Bronx, a lot of people don't realize, is 42 square miles, 6 by 7, the same exact size as Prescott, Arizona.
Wow.
When I was growing up, we were getting approximately 200 murders a year in the Bronx, and in my neighborhood, which is about 1 square mile, we were getting 50 murders a year. By the time I left the area, but I was still going back to work there, New York City hit over 3,000 murders in 1 year. 800 of them were in the Bronx, 42 square miles, 6 by 7. But, as you're growing up, you don't realize those things. I've got one book back there about Bronx girls gone. When I was in the 2nd grade, a girl in my class was murdered. Some creep took her, promised her a lollipop and a dime. Took her to the roof of one of the project buildings, two buildings away from where I was living at the time, and he threw her off, and God knows what else he did. Then when I was in the 3rd grade, another girl in my class, she went out to the store to buy something for Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving. They had shut the school down early that day. And a neighbor pulled her into the apartment, brutally murdered and raped her. And he got the death penalty. 2 years later, they said it was too cruel. They gave him life imprisonment without parole. 3 years after that, they said that was too cruel. You couldn't give him, without parole. And eventually got paroled and sent back. But the 2 stories I'm reading tonight are not going to be as dark. Some may consider them dark, but they're really not. They're true stories. The only embellishment done is, just normal fancy commas and colons and stuff like that. Otherwise, it's the way it is. Let me get started with it. The first story, I timed it at around 7 minutes, 8 minutes, and then the other one 7 or 8, so it's 15 minutes in total. And I have to wear my reading glasses because my regular glasses, I don't like the little line there to look through bifocal. So anyway, so I'll see if I get used to these. Just got them. Okay. Let's see, here we go. One Bronx Saturday. I was 11 when West Side Story hit the silver screen. I did not know it, but I was growing up smack in the middle of a melting pot. In the early 1960s, my South Bronx neighborhood consisted mostly of Irish and Italian Catholics, but we had a fair share of Finnish, German, and Swedish Lutherans. They stuck together like a herd of moose. On the nicer neighborhood streets, a wealth of Jews lived in newer buildings and employed a smattering of blacks as supers and janitors. So when Ernesto Salgado moved into a nearby building, he was more of an oddity than a threat. Ernesto was the first live Puerto Rican I had ever seen. Living a block away in the Bronx meant he was in a different crowd than mine. We never called it a gang because all we really did was hang out together and make sure other kids from other crowds didn't pick or bully on one of us. On my street alone, there were 20 small apartment buildings with about 20 kids in each building. With so many youngsters running around, a firm rule voiced by our parents was to stay on the block so I could see you. This edict was strictly enforced. The busybodies, yentas, and our mothers could look out a window and see exactly who was doing what. Some of the older women would place a pillow or cushion on their windowsill or fire escape and watch the street all day and into the night. If we stepped out of line, our mom might get a phone call and that'd be it for us. Ernesto became friends with Jimmy Stanton, a kid I knew from school. They lived in the same building 2 blocks from me. Jimmy introduced me to Ernesto, and even though they were in the 164th Street crowd and I was in the 162nd Street crowd, we all became friends. We all loved to play baseball, and we were Yankee fans. During the summer, my parents would let me leave the block on Saturdays to play baseball on one of the fields near Yankee Stadium. There were 6 grass diamonds outside the famous ballpark, and we always mustered up enough neighborhood players for a game. In the mornings before I left, my mother would make cheese and mustard sandwiches, wrap them in wax paper, and put them in a small brown paper bag. When I got thirsty, the public water fountain in the park was the best water in the world. With everyone using it, the water was always nice and cool. On those summer days, we played ball from 8 in the morning until late afternoon. Sometimes on a hot Saturday after a game, we'd head a few blocks over to the Harlem River, where some of the guys would dive off an abandoned dock for a swim. I never went in. A few years earlier, my mom had laid down the law about going in the river. As an 8-year-old, I had ventured to the river with some friends, collected blue crabs at low tide, and brought them home. I got a beating, and to this day, although more than half a century has disappeared, I can still hear her words. "Young man, don't you ever go in that river again." Well, that Saturday at the river, we built a raft from pieces of scrap wood and broken pallets. It floated. Most of the guys jumped into the river and started to play King of the Raft. Ernesto was holding on to a corner of the raft as the current started to drag it towards deeper water. Jimmy was king. I stood on the dock having as much fun watching as they were having, pushing each other on and off the raft. Ernesto managed to climb onto the raft. Jimmy pushed him off. Caught up in the moment, with everyone hollering, splashing, and trying to dethrone Jimmy, no one noticed Ernesto sinking. The cops took us in and questioned us individually. I was 12 at the time. For the next 3 days, parents, police, and just about the whole neighborhood gathered at the river. My mother was standing with Ernesto's mom when a police boat dragging the river found the body. As his son was being pulled from the river, Mrs. Delgado let out the most horrific scream I had ever heard. I couldn't even look at her. No one was blamed for Ernesto's drowning, but something ate away at my soul. Jimmy Stanton and I stayed friends, but we both grew up drinking a lot. One night in the bar when we were in our 20s, Jimmy told me he knew Ernesto couldn't swim. I asked him, "If you knew, why did you push him off?" He looked at me, started crying, and said, "I don't know. I swear to God, I just don't know." So, anyway, I quit drinking when I was in my early 30s. I was just one of those guys that shouldn't be drinking. Didn't get any DWIs, didn't get any, like that. It was just... Ernesto, still think about him now and then, and Jimmy Stanton, who's not his real name, because I wrote this in a lot of neighborhood people that did read this story. I didn't want them, blaming this other fellow. But he kept drinking, and he's still alive though. He's my age and still kicking away. Anyway, so that's One Bronx Saturday. Where is it? Yeah. I'm gonna have to run back to my box. Okay. This next short story is about when I was a little older, maybe when I was 16. We used to hang out on the corners, after school on weekends a lot in the city. Got all these apartment buildings that they used to call candy stores, which were cigarette stores that sold newspapers and stuff. Maybe buy a Coke, so we'd hang out by the candy store, and for some reason the cops didn't like teenagers hanging out on corners. So a lot of times they'd come by and tell us to keep moving, get out of here. It wasn't too bad, no police brutality back then that I remember. But we did have a couple of cops that had a mean streak. And whenever they came around, they looked like they'd try to start in with somebody just for something to show their authority. God knows what they were doing, but they were not nice people. Okay, this is a little reflection. I started this little story just as just writing something, and one of my neighbors from the Bronx, he read it and he liked it. He said, work on it and see what you come up with. So this is what I have. I named it Hanging Out on a Bronx Street Corner. In the mid-1960s, the cops in our Bronx neighborhood always rode in pairs. Whenever a cop car turned down our block and saw a group of neighborhood youths hanging out on the street corner, they would slow down, and the cop in the passenger seat would have a good look at our faces. God forbid if anyone said a word as they gave us the once-over. Back then, that would be a big mistake, especially if one of the cops in the car was in a bad mood. One of our worst nightmares came true every time Officers Spider and Flynn were on patrol. Those two had the infamous reputation of being the meanest cops in the neighborhood. The old story about the efficiency of teaming up a good cop with a bad cop and sending them out on patrol together went awry when these two became partners. Both had an unquenchable mean streak. Most of the kids in the neighborhood feared them and usually stopped playing street games if they knew those two creeps were on patrol. It was not unusual for a cop car to turn a street corner in the South Bronx and see a dozen or so youths playing stickball on a side street where there was hardly any traffic. Most of the time, the cops never bothered us for playing stickball. They would make sure we were not causing any trouble, like being a little rowdy or playing our transistor radios too loud. And when they were satisfied that we were not up to no good, they would move on and do whatever cops do when they were on patrol. However, if Officers Spider and Flynn turned the corner and caught us playing stickball, they would jump out of their patrol car and confiscate the stickball bats. Then they would take the bats, which were usually just old broomsticks that we got from our mothers, and they would walk over to one of the street sewers, stick the stick halfway into the sewer and snap it in half. And if they got their hands on one of our Spaldings, which were high bouncing rubber balls that we used to play stickball, they would take them too. If we complained and asked why they took our stuff, they would say it's for your own good. If you don't have a bat, you can't hit someone with it. And if you don't have a ball, you can't play in the middle of the street and get yourself hit by a car. Well, I remember one day in 1966 when a few of us, 16 and 17-year-olds, were standing outside Carter's cat-infested candy store on 162nd Street and Woody Crest Avenue. The cop on the passenger side was Officer Flynn. He gave us a good look over, and then pointing at Jimmy Lathan, he said, "Hey you, are you nervous?" Jimmy, taken aback by the cop's curious question, said, "What, do I look like I'm nervous to you?" Officer Flynn, one of those wannabe detective types, looked a bit shocked by Jimmy's quick answer and without hesitation jumped out of the police car with a firm grip on his nightstick and said, "What are you, a wise ass?" Well, Jimmy was the kind of guy who was not easy to shake up. He calmly stood on the cracked concrete sidewalk without bothering to give an answer to the cop. By this time, a bunch of younger neighborhood kids who were playing stoop ball down the block had hurried up the street to see what was happening. The younger kids mingled around and started asking us, "Why are the cops here?" That's when a few of the neighborhood mothers who had been sitting on folding chairs in front of the apartment house across the street strolled over across the cobblestone street to see what the commotion was all about. I'm not sure about everyone else, but the longer I stood watching the situation develop, the more I felt as if something bad was going to happen, especially when Flynn started slapping his nightstick against the big metal drop-off mailbox that was mounted on the concrete sidewalk. To me, it sounded like one of those Indian war drums, the ones that used to be part of the old Western black and white TV movies. The encounter was tense. The younger kids were getting louder and acting like 8 and 9-year-olds they were. Meanwhile, me and the other 4 guys who were with Jimmy knew enough to keep our mouths shut. Mrs. Kelly, one of the loudest mothers in the neighborhood, approached the driver's side of the patrol car with a lit cigarette hanging from her mouth and holding a crying baby under one arm. When she was about 5 feet from the driver's window, she removed the cigarette from her mouth and she hollered, "Officer, what's going on here?" That's when Officer Spider tapped the car's horn to get the attention of his partner. And just about the same time that Mrs. Kelly got the driver's attention, Mr. Carter emerged from his cat-infested store with the largest straw broom I had ever seen. He held the broom in one hand with the straw end up in the air over his head. Seeing Mr. Carter with the supersized straw broom silenced the entire crowd. Mr. Carter had everyone's attention. Even Officer Flynn, with the nightstick still in his hand, stared at Mr. Carter like he was the professor who came out from behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. After a few seconds of silence, Mr. Carter's raspy cigarette voice rang out like an air raid siren. "Get out of here, go home. I don't know how many times I've told you, you're blocking my paying customers. Now get lost before I call the cops." Well, none of us teens knew what to do, and I don't think the cops did either. Officer Flynn was the first to make a move. He walked over to the driver's window, and after a few words with his partner, he walked back to the passenger side of the car, got in, and the two most feared cops in our South Bronx neighborhood, Spider and Flynn, drove away without saying another word. Thank you. Any questions? No, huh? Well, I'm going to give you some answers. Right? Unfortunately, Jimmy Latham, that's his real name, May 3rd, 1970, he was 20 years old, I was 19, I wouldn't be 20 for another few weeks. We were hanging out in a bar on 162nd Street and Ogden Avenue that was a block away from Woodycrest. And I heard there was something going on in Fordham Road at Fordham University, so myself and 3 other guys, we left. And then we came back around a little after midnight. There were cops all over the place. A couple of guys pulled up. There was an argument a few hours earlier. I wasn't there for that. And they just emptied all the guns into the bar. They hit 7 people. They killed Jimmy Latham and Kevin Spellman, who was in my class. So, you know, you hear about all the violence today. I'm not trying to put it down, but this has been going on for a long time. And I'm not trying to be any political one way or the other. It's just crazy, you know? And today, I wouldn't go back to that neighborhood. I've been out in Prescott now for 20-something years, a resident for 20 years, a part-time resident for 5 years before that. And I worked in New York City a lot as a journeyman electrician. So I worked on the World Trade Center when it was up, and I was working there up until 2 weeks before it got hit. I got transferred out. God, somebody was watching me, but as far as violence, I just don't understand why it goes on and on and on. Mike, can you tell us why it goes on?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell us why there's all violence in the world? No. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. Anyway, everyone have a good evening. I do have some books back there. I have one here, Prescott, Arizona, the first 50 years. It's commentary, but there's a lot of news articles in here about the people that lived in the area back then and the newspaper reporters. And unlike a lot of other news articles you'll see in books, these are legible, all right? And you know, they're 100% legible, and they cast a light on the city of Prescott from 1864 to 1904. Anyway, let me get off stage here. Who's up next? Any poems? Dennis, want to come up and read?
I have no read.